My name is Yaroslav, and I never liked going back to that village. There was nothing special about it, just a few old houses, a narrow road through the forest, and the constant smell of dampness after rain. But ever since childhood, I felt like there was something wrong with that place. At night, the dogs there never barked. People locked their windows early and almost never went outside after sunset. And my father always repeated one strange phrase. If you hear someone calling you outside at night, don't go out, even if it sounds... When I was a kid, I thought he was just trying to scare me, like parents sometimes do. But over the years, that memory never disappeared. If anything, it became even stranger. I left the village when I was 19. I moved to Poltava, got a job repairing electronics, rented a tiny apartment, and tried not to think about the past. I barely spoke with my parents. Sometimes Mom would call and complain that I had forgotten about my family. Dad almost never talked on the phone.
The last time I saw them was 7 months ago. And honestly, even then, something already felt wrong. Dad looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept for weeks. Mom kept glancing nervously toward the windows. Whenever I asked what happened, they only said, "Things aren't peaceful in the village anymore." I didn't ask questions. I just wanted to leave as quickly as possible. Then one evening, my mother...
It was her number. But the voice, I still remember how my hands went cold. Yaroslav, come home. Silence. Breathing. Very slow breathing, like someone forcing themselves to speak. Mom? What happened? She stayed silent for a few seconds. We miss you. Then the call ended. I tried calling back 10 times. No answer. That night, I barely slept. There was this strange feeling, like something heavy was pressing against my chest. Around 3 in the morning, I received a text message from my mother's phone. Don't be late. No period. The road through the forest always made me nervous, especially in autumn. The trees looked black and soaked with rain, while thick fog crawled low enough to cover the sides of the road. I had been driving for almost an hour when I noticed something strange. There were no cars, not a single one. Even the old village bus that always passed through around 4 in the afternoon never appeared. When I finally entered the village, the feeling got worse. Empty. No people anywhere. Several gates stood wide open, but no one was around. Near the store, a bicycle lay abandoned in the middle of the road. I slowed the car down. Then I noticed old Helena standing near the well. Her back was turned toward me, completely motionless. I stepped out of the car. "Good afternoon." She didn't answer. She only slowly turned her head toward me. I barely recognized. Her face looked pale. Her eyes were red and terrified. "Yaroslav," she whispered. "Yes, what happened here?" She suddenly grabbed my sleeve. Her fingers were trembling. "Don't stay here after dark." "Why?" She glanced around nervously. "You're not the same anymore." Something tightened inside my chest. Who? Old Helena opened her mouth like she wanted to and turned even paler. "Leave," she whispered, "right now." I turned around. My father stood in the middle of the road about 30 meters away, just staring at us. I hadn't even heard him approach. "Dad?" He smiled. But the smile looked wrong. Forced. Like someone pretending to understand human emotions. Old Helena quickly let go of me and hurried back toward her yard without looking back once. My father stood perfectly still. "Hello, son," he said. The voice was his. And at the same time, not. I walked closer. He smelled like wet girth and something rotten. "What happened? Why did Mom call me like that?" He stayed silent for a few seconds, then finally answered, "Your mother was worried." That was it. No explanation. We walked home in silence. As soon as I entered the yard, I noticed strange things. The old swing was broken. Dirty footprints, barefoot footprints, stretched across the porch. And another thing. It was too quiet. Way too quiet. Not even birds. Mom was waiting inside the house. She hugged me, but I immediately tensed. Her hands were cold. Ice cold. "I missed you so much," she whispered into my ear. And right at that moment, I heard something upstairs. A strange sound, like someone slowly dragging something heavy across the floor. I pulled away from her. "Do you have guests?" Mom froze. Dad slowly turned his head toward the stairs. Then both of them looked at me at the exact same moment. "No," they said together. And that was the moment I realized coming here was a mistake. After dinner, I couldn't calm down. My parents acted as if everything was completely normal. Mom kept bringing food to the table, asking about my job, even smiling sometimes. But it all felt unnatural. She repeated the same phrases over and over again, like she forgot she had already said them minutes earlier. "You should visit more often. We missed you so much. It's quiet here now." Especially the last one. "It's quiet here now." She must have said it 10 times. Dad barely spoke at all. He just sat there, staring at me. He hardly blinked. Sometimes it felt like he wasn't even listening to the conversation, like he was listening to something else. Outside, darkness came quickly. The wind howled beyond the windows, while old tree branches scratched against the roof. I tried to stay calm, but something... "You're tired from the drive." I said nothing. When dinner ended, Mom prepared my old room for me on the first floor. "It's cold upstairs," she said. "Nobody's lived there for a long time." But that was exactly where the sounds were coming from. I closed the bedroom door and sat on the bed. Everything looked almost the same as it had in childhood. The old shelves, the wardrobe, the posters on the walls. Yet the room felt abandoned, like nobody had entered it in years. An old school photo of me stood on the nightstand. I picked it up and froze. On the back of the picture, someone had carved words with a knife. "Don't trust them." My mouth went dry. I knew for a fact that message had never been there before. Then the sound above my head came again. Thump, thump, thump. Slow footsteps. I looked up at the ceiling. Someone was walking directly above my room. I stood up. I wanted to go talk to my parents, but the hallway outside was silent. No voices came from the kitchen anymore. "Mom?" I called quietly. No answer. Then I noticed something strange. The door leading upstairs was slightly open. I clearly remembered it being closed before. Creak. Another sound came from upstairs. I honestly don't know why I decided to go up there. maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that all of this was nonsense. The stairs groaned under my feet. The higher I climbed, the stronger the smell became. Dampness, rot, and something else, like old raw meat. The second floor was freezing cold, much colder than downstairs. The hallway lay in darkness, with only pale moonlight slipping through a dirty window. I turned on my phone flashlight and saw footprints. Dirty, barefoot footprints. They stretched across the floor toward my parents' bedroom. The door was slightly open. I slowly stepped closer. Then I heard a strange sound. Crunching, like someone chewing on something hard. My heart started pounding so loudly I could barely think. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the floor, long scratches covered the wall, as if someone had clawed at the wood with their fingernails. Then I heard breathing behind me. Slow, hoarse. I spun around. Mom stood at the end of the hallway. In the darkness, I could only see her silhouette. "Yaroslav," she whispered softly. I felt frozen in place. "What are you doing up here?" Her voice sounded wrong, like two people speaking at the same time. I forced myself to smile. "I heard noises." She slowly stepped forward. Then another step. That was when I noticed how strangely she stood. Her arms hung too low, almost reaching her knees. "You shouldn't walk around up here," she whispered. "Why?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me. Then, suddenly, something moved behind her. A dark figure quickly crawled across the hallway floor and disappeared behind the corner. I froze. Who was that? Mom sharply turned her head toward the darkness. Her neck cracked so loudly that chills shot down my spine. Then she looked back at me and smiled. Far too wide. You imagined it. At that exact moment, a loud slam echoed downstairs. Dad had returned. I heard his voice from the first floor. "Where's Yaroslav?" Mom never took her eyes off me. "Go to sleep," she whispered. I quickly walked past her, and as I passed close enough, I smelled it. Fresh blood. I nearly ran down the stairs. Dad stood in the hallway, staring directly at me. His clothes were wet. Like he had just come back from the forest. There was a dark stain on his sleeve. It looked like blood. "You were upstairs?" he asked. I swallowed hard. Yes. The entire house went silent. So silent, I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. Dad slowly smiled. "You shouldn't have." That night, I barely slept. After what my father said, only one thought kept spinning inside my head. You shouldn't have. Not you shouldn't go there. Not why did you do that? It sounded more like a warning, like it was already too late for me now. I lay in the darkness staring at the ceiling, while the old clock in the living room ticked louder and louder with every second. Tick, tick, tick. Then, sometime after 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps above me again. Slow, dragging, like someone walking barefoot across the wooden floor upstairs. I sat up in bed. Nobody's lived there for a long time. My mother's words suddenly sounded completely different in my head. Because if nobody lived there, Then who was walking above my room? I checked my phone. 3:17 a.m. And right then, the footsteps stopped. Total silence filled the house. A few seconds later, something scratched softly beneath my bedroom door. Slowly, like fingers dragging across the wood. I stopped breathing. The scratching continued. Then came 3 quiet knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. Then I heard my mother's voice. Yaroslav, open the door. Everything inside me turned cold. The voice sounded soft, almost gentle, but my mother had never spoken like that before. I stayed silent. For a few seconds, nothing happened outside the room. Then the voice came again. Only now it sounded different. Lower. Raspy. We know you're awake. My entire body started shaking. Slowly, I got out of bed and backed toward the window. Outside the door, I heard another strange sound. Sniffing. Slow, heavy breathing. Then, creak. Something clawed against the door. Long, slow. I couldn't take it anymore. Quietly, I unlocked the window and pushed it open. Freezing night air hit my face instantly. The first floor wasn't very high. I climbed onto the windowsill and jumped into the wet grass below. The second my feet touched the ground, I heard violent movement inside the house, like something had rushed toward my room. I ran. I didn't even know where. Anywhere away from that house. Moonlight barely pierced through the clouds. The yard looked unfamiliar now. The old trees swayed in the wind, while the rusty swing near the shed creaked slowly on its own. That was when I noticed the light inside the shed. Dim, yellow, like an old hanging bulb. I froze. My father always kept that shed locked. Ever since I was little, he told me never to go inside. But now, the door stood slightly open, and from inside came the same sound again, crunching, like bones snapping. Behind me, the front door of the house slammed open. They realized I was gone. I sprinted toward the shed and slipped inside, shutting the door behind me. The air inside was damp and freezing cold. A weak yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered constantly. And the smell, it nearly made me vomit. Rotting meat, blood, something dead. I turned on my phone flashlight and looked around. Old tools, dusty bags, and something large covered with a dirty tarp in the corner. Crunch. The sound came again. Quietly. Right beside me. I spun around. Nothing. But the sound had come from beneath the tarp. My hands were trembling. I didn't want to walk closer. Honestly. Every instinct inside me screamed to run. But I already knew one thing. If I didn't find out the truth now, I never would. Slowly, I grabbed the edge of the tarp and pulled it down. I threw up immediately. Human bones, dozens of them, gnawed almost completely clean. Some still had scraps of flesh attached. And on top of the pile, I recognized my mother's robe. The same blue robe with little flowers she'd worn for years. Beside it lay my father's shirt, covered in dark brown stains. I stumbled backward, barely able to breathe. My legs felt numb. No. This couldn't be real. I stared at those clothes while my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. My real parents were here. Dead. Inside this shed. And the things inside the house were not human. Suddenly, the shed door creaked open. I froze. Someone stood outside. Very slowly, the door opened wider. My mother's face appeared in the gap. But now, she wasn't even trying to look normal anymore. Her skin looked pale and stretched tight like a mask. Her eyes were completely black. And her smile, far too wide for a human mouth. Yaroslav, she whispered, you were never supposed to see this. I stumbled backward. Then, my father stepped out of the darkness behind her. His arms looked unnaturally long. His fingers nearly touched the ground. He stared at me while breathing heavily, like a starving animal. Protected you, he said. His voice no longer sounded human. It sounded like several voices speaking together. I backed toward the rear wall of the shed. My heart pounded so hard my vision blurred. My mother stepped inside. Then another step. Her legs bent the wrong way as she moved, like bones breaking beneath her skin. Don't be afraid, she whispered. You will become part of the family too. Then something moved behind me. I slowly turned around. A thin figure sat in the darkness at the back of the shed. Dirty, barely alive. Human. Then the figure lifted its head, and I recognized our neighbor, Mykola, or what was left of him. He was still alive. Mykola sat in the corner of the shed, leaning weakly against the wall. His face looked gray and hollow, his bloodshot eyes barely able to stay open. Deep scratches covered his arms, like he had tried to fight something off. One of his legs bent at a horrible angle, clearly broken. But none of that was the worst part. The worst part was the way he looked at me, like a man who had already accepted he was going to die. Yaroslav, he whispered painfully. Run. My mother's head snapped toward him so fast her neck cracked loudly. Be quiet, she hissed. Her voice no longer sounded human. It was layered, like several voices speaking at once. My father stood in the doorway of the shed, breathing heavily. His chest twitched unnaturally, while his fingers slowly curled inward, like he was struggling not to attack me. What are you? I whispered. Neither of them answered. They only smiled. Then, suddenly, Mykola spoke again. They came from the forest. My mother jerked violently toward him, almost like she was afraid. 3 weeks ago, your father found something there. Mykola coughed blood onto the floor. After that, they changed. Shut up! My father screamed. The sound exploded through the shed so loudly the hanging bulb swung back and forth. And then I saw something horrifying. The skin on my father's face moved, like something beneath it was crawling, slowly, twisting. His smile stretched wider, far wider than any human face should allow. The corners of his mouth split almost to his ears. I stumbled backward. Makola suddenly grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Behind the shed. Old crawl space. Run! I didn't think. I just moved. I rushed toward the back wall, where a rotting wooden hatch barely hung on rusted hinges. At that exact moment, my mother screamed. Not like a human. A sharp, piercing shriek filled the shed. Chaos exploded behind me. Heavy impacts slammed against the floorboards. Wood cracked. Something growled violently. I threw the hatch open and crawled outside into the freezing wet grass. Behind me, I heard Makola scream. Then, the sound of bones breaking. I ran. The forest stood only a few meters behind the house. Dark, dense, almost alive. Branches whipped across my face, while mud swallowed my shoes. But I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard something far worse than footsteps. That clicking sound again. Fast, like enormous limbs striking the ground. They were chasing me. I sprinted between the trees, barely able to see through the darkness. Only flashes of moonlight cut through the clouds, briefly illuminating the forest around me. Then I heard my mother's voice, very close. Yaroslav. A figure moved between the trees to my left. Her body twisted unnaturally as she crawled forward with terrifying speed. I turned sharply and suddenly burst into a small clearing. An old hunting cabin stood in the middle of it, half rotten, crooked, but the door hung open. I rushed inside and slammed it shut behind me. Silence. Only my heavy breathing. I looked around. Rusty cans, a torn blanket, an old hunting knife lying on a table, and scratched into the wall beside it were words carved deep into the wood. They wear our faces. My entire body shook. Then I heard branches crunching outside. Slow footsteps. Something circled the cabin. A scraping sound slid slowly across the door. Then, my father's voice spoke from outside. "Son, come out." I stayed silent. He laughed quietly, and the sound froze my blood. Because it didn't sound like a human laugh. It sounded fake, like a creature trying to imitate emotion. "We don't want to hurt you," my mother's voice said softly from outside. "We're just hungry." I grabbed the knife. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it. Then something massive slammed into the wall of the cabin. Once. Twice. The wood cracked loudly. They were breaking in. I looked around desperately and noticed a tiny window behind me. Without thinking, I climbed through it and ran deeper into the forest. Behind me came a horrible scream. They saw me. Now the clicking sounds were right behind me. I ran blindly through the darkness. Just farther, farther away. Then, suddenly, light. Headlights. A road. I burst out of the forest directly in front of an old police truck. The vehicle screeched to a stop. A police officer jumped out. "Who the hell are you?" I collapsed onto my knees, gasping for air. "There's something in the forest. My parents!" The officer opened his mouth to speak. Then his expression changed. He looked past me and went pale. Slowly, I turned around. They stood at the edge of the forest. The vehicle screeched to a stop. A police officer jumped out. "Who the hell are you?" I collapsed onto my knees, gasping for air. "There's something in the forest! My parents!" The officer opened his mouth to speak. Then his expression changed. He looked past me and went pale. Slowly, I turned around. They stood at the edge of the forest.